"Pretend I'm yours until he leaves," she whispered, her fingers digging desperately into the lapel of a man who owned half the city's underground. Her heart hammered against her ribs as her abusive ex stalked through the crowded ballroom toward them. Dobbin Mendoza didn't look at her. He didn't flinch. Instead, his heavy hand slid to the small of her back, his grip like a vice. "I don't pretend," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly threat. And just like that, a fake lifeline became a real trap. The ice sculpture in the center of the room was sweating. It was a swan, wings spread, melting under the glare of crystal chandeliers and the suffocating heat of 500 wealthy bodies. Catalina stood by the silent auction tables, a clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. She hated these events. The charity gala was just an excuse for the city's elite to drink overpriced champagne and launder their reputations. She was here to verify the provenance of a 19th century landscape painting for her gallery. That was all. Go in, confirm the brushstrokes, log the bid, and go home to her quiet, empty apartment. Then she saw him. Logan. He was standing near the velvet-roped entrance, handing his coat to a server. He hadn't changed. He still wore the same sharp suits that hid the bruising force of his hands. Catalina's breath caught in her throat. The ambient noise of the ballroom, the clinking glasses, the low hum of jazz, the hollow laughter, turned into a high-pitched ringing in her ears. She took a step back. Her heel caught on the edge of the Persian rug. She stumbled, catching herself against a mahogany table. Logan's head turned. His eyes swept the room. They moved past the politicians, past the socialites, and locked directly onto her. Even from 50 feet away, Catalina could see the cruel, familiar smirk pull at the corner of his mouth. He started walking. Panic was a physical thing. It was bile in the back of her throat and lead in her veins. She couldn't let him corner her here. Not in public, where a scene would cost her the job she desperately needed. Not in private, where he would do much worse. She looked left, blocked by a cluster of laughing women in silk gowns. She looked right. The exit was too far, guarded by security who wouldn't care if a man dragged his girlfriend out by the wrist. She moved backward, blindly, desperately, trying to melt into the crowd. She hit a solid wall. It wasn't a wall. It was a chest, broad, unyielding, clad in charcoal grey wool. A hand caught her elbow to steady her. The grip was instantaneous and absolute. Not tight enough to bruise, but firm enough to communicate complete control. Catalina gasped, spinning around. Dobbin Mendoza was staring down at her. He didn't look like the rest of the men in the room. They looked like money. He looked like the thing that money bought when it needed to survive. His eyes were dark, flat, and completely devoid of warmth. There was a faint, jagged scar cutting through the line of his left eyebrow, breaking the harsh symmetry of his face. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, cataloguing her panic, her cheap dress, the trembling of her hands. Logan was 20 feet away now, pushing past a waiter, closing the distance. Survival instinct overrode common sense. Catalina didn't think about who Dobbin Mendoza was. She didn't think about the shipping containers at the docks or the whispered stories of men who crossed him and simply ceased to exist. She just knew he was the only thing in the room bigger and more dangerous than the man coming for her. She stepped into Dobbin's space. She grabbed his lapel. The wool was rough under her cold fingers. "Pretend I'm yours until he leaves," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a ragged, pathetic rush. "Please." Dobbin's expression didn't shift. He didn't look over her shoulder to see who she was running from. He simply looked down at her hands, white-knuckled against his suit jacket. "I don't pretend," Dobbin said. His voice was a physical weight in the air, low, gravelly. It didn't invite argument. Before Catalina could process the rejection, before she could pull away and run, Dobbin's arm came around her waist. He didn't just hold her, he absorbed her. He pulled her flush against his side, his large hands splaying wide across the small of her back. The heat of him seeped through the thin silk of her dress. Logan stopped dead 3 feet away. The smugness evaporated from Logan's face. replaced by a sudden, stark realization of who he was standing in front of. He looked at Catalina, then at the heavy hand resting on her spine, and finally up to Dobbin's face. "Catalina," Logan said. His voice wavered, just a fraction. He tried to puff out his chest. "What are you doing? Let's go." Dobbin finally moved his eyes from Catalina to Logan. It wasn't a glare. It was an autopsy. He looked at Logan the way a man looks at a cockroach on his kitchen floor. "You're lost," Dobbin said to Logan. "She's my fiancée," Logan lied, taking a half step forward. "She's coming with me." Dobbin didn't shift his stance. He didn't raise his voice. He just tightened his grip on Catalina's waist. "She was," Dobbin corrected, the words dropping like stones into a quiet pond. "Now she's standing here, with me. Walk away before I have security throw you out through a closed window." Silence stretched between them. The surrounding crowd hadn't noticed the quiet, violent standoff. They were still drinking, still laughing. But in this 3-foot radius, the air was entirely void of oxygen. Logan's jaw tightened. He looked at Catalina, his eyes promising violence later, promising a reckoning. But he was a coward at his core. He was a bully who only hit things that couldn't hit back. Dobbin Mendoza could hit back, and he would use a sledgehammer to do it. Logan swallowed hard, took a step back, and turned away, disappearing into the throng of people. Catalina let out a long, shaky exhale. Her knees felt like water. She tried to step back, to pull away from the heavy, anchoring arm holding her up. Dobbin's grip didn't loosen, not a fraction of an inch. She looked up at him. "He's gone. You can let go now. Thank you." Dobbin looked down at her. His dark eyes were unreadable, but there was a cold intelligence buzzing behind them. "I told you," Dobbin said softly. "I don't pretend. You ask to be mine. You are." He didn't give her a chance to argue. Dobbin's hand slid from her waist, clamped firmly around her wrist, and he began walking. He didn't drag her, but the sheer momentum of his stride forced her to keep up or be pulled. They cut through the ballroom. People naturally parted for him. No one asked questions. No one stopped them. "Where are we going?" Catalina demanded in a harsh whisper, trying to dig her heels into the carpet. She might as well have been trying to stop a freight train. "Out," was his only reply. The cool night air hit her like a slap as they exited the hotel. The valet stand was a flurry of activity, but Dobbin didn't break stride. A sleek black SUV pulled up immediately, bypassing a line of waiting guests. The driver hopped out, opening the rear door. Dobbin released her wrist and gestured to the open door. "Get in." Catalina stood on the pavement. The adrenaline that had spiked when she saw Logan was crashing now, leaving her feeling hollowed out and violently shaking. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stave off the chill. "No," she said. It sounded weak even to her own ears. "I just needed him to walk away. That's it. The transaction is over. I'm calling a cab." Dobbin paused. He turned to face her fully, the ambient light from the street lamps casting harsh shadows across the planes of his face. "You think this is a game?" he asked. His voice was conversational, which somehow made it vastly more terrifying. "You think you can walk up to me, use my name, use my physical presence to shield yourself from a street-level rat, and then just walk away?" "I didn't use you," she lied. "You painted a target on your back," Dobbin corrected coldly. "That man knows who I am. By tomorrow morning, everyone he talks to will know that Dobbin Mendoza stepped in for a girl in a cheap dress at the Grand Hotel. They will wonder why. They will look into you. If I let you walk down this street and get into a cab, you are unprotected luggage. Someone will pick you up just to see what's inside." Catalina stared at him. The reality of what she had done was beginning to sink in. She had thrown herself into the ocean to avoid a puddle. "I don't have anything of value," she said. "I'm an art appraiser. I live in a studio apartment." "You have value because you stood next to me," Dobbin said. He looked at his watch. "You have 5 seconds to get into the car. If you don't, I will leave you here, and when your ex-boyfriend comes back, because we both know he's waiting around the block, You can deal with him yourself. He wasn't bluffing. He didn't care either way. To him, this was simple mathematics. Catalina looked over her shoulder, down the dark, winding street. The shadows looked deeper than before. She looked back at the open door of the SUV. The interior was pitch black, a void. She climbed in. Dobbin followed, shutting the door behind him. The sound of the lock engaging was a heavy mechanical thud that echoed in her chest. The ride was agonizingly silent. The glass separating them from the driver was thick and opaque. The leather seats smelled like cedar and expensive cologne. Catalina pressed herself against the passenger door, putting as much space between them as the confined interior allowed. Dobbin didn't look at her. He opened a laptop resting on the center console and began reading. The blue light illuminated his harsh profile. He looked entirely relaxed, completely unbothered by the fact that he had just essentially kidnapped a woman. "Where are you taking me?" she asked after 10 minutes of suffocating quiet. The city lights were thinning out, replaced by the darker stretches of the suburban outskirts. "My house. I want to go to my apartment." He didn't look up from the screen. "Your apartment is compromised. He knows where you live." "He doesn't have a key anymore. I changed the locks." Dobbin finally paused. He closed the laptop with a soft click and turned his head. The look he gave her was one of profound, tired pity. "Catalina," he said, and the sound of her name in his rough voice sent a shiver down her spine. "Locks keep out honest people. They don't keep out men who want to hurt you. You are staying with me until I decide what to do with you." "Decide what to do with me?" Her voice rose in pitch. Anger was finally starting to burn through the fear. "I'm not a stray dog you picked up off the street. I have a job. I have a life." "You had a life," Dobbin corrected. "Then you grabbed my jacket. Now your life is paused." The SUV turned off the main road, the tires crunching over gravel. Large, wrought-iron gates loomed out of the darkness. They swung open automatically, revealing a long, winding driveway flanked by towering pine trees. At the end of the drive sat a sprawling, modern compound of concrete, steel, and glass. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. The vehicle rolled to a stop beneath a heavy concrete overhang. The driver opened Dobbin's door. Dobbin stepped out, then waited. Catalina looked at the imposing structure, then at the man waiting for her. She had asked for a monster to fight her monster. Now she was walking into the monster's cave. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out into the cold night air. Dobbin walked toward the massive front door. He didn't look back to see if she was following. He knew she was. She had nowhere else to go. Catalina woke to the smell of strong coffee and rain. She opened her eyes, staring at a ceiling made of exposed concrete. It took her brain several long, agonizing seconds to boot up and realize she wasn't in her cramped studio apartment. She was in a bed the size of a small boat, wrapped in sheets that felt like spun silk. The memories of the previous nights slammed into her. The gala, Logan, the lapel, the car ride. She sat up abruptly. The room was massive, minimalist, and entirely devoid of personal touches. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a sprawling, manicured lawn that ended in a dense tree line. Rain was lashing against the glass, blurring the world outside. A heavy mahogany door sat across from the bed. It was shut. Catalina threw back the covers. She was still wearing the slip she had worn under her dress the night before. Her dress had been folded neatly over a chair, her heels placed perfectly beside it. She felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck. Had someone undressed her? Had he? She rushed to the chair, grabbing the dress and pulling it over her head, shivering as the cold silk hit her skin. She shoved her feet into the heels and marched toward the door. She grabbed the handle and twisted. It opened. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She half expected to be locked in. She stepped out into a wide, stark hallway, lined with modern art that she immediately recognized as originals. A Rothko, a small Pollock, millions of dollars hanging casually on concrete walls. She followed the smell of coffee, walking softly down a floating wooden staircase. The house was entirely silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain. She found the kitchen at the end of a long corridor. It was a massive, industrial space of stainless steel and dark marble. Dobbin was sitting at a massive island, drinking espresso and reading a physical newspaper. He wore a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans. Without the bespoke suit, he looked wider, rougher. The scars on his knuckles were stark white against his tanned skin. He didn't look up as she entered. "There's coffee in the carafe. Mugs are in the cabinet to your left." Catalina hovered in the doorway. She didn't want coffee. She wanted her life back. "I need my phone," she said. She had realized, upon waking, that her small clutch purse was missing. Dobbin turned a page of the newspaper. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. "It's been disposed of." Catalina froze. "What?" "It was compromised," he stated, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "I had a team sweep it. Your ex installed tracker software on it 3 months ago. That's how he found you at the gala. It's sitting at the bottom of the river now." A cold sickness pooled in her stomach. Logan had been tracking her. For months. Every step, every coffee shop, every late night at the gallery. She leaned against the cold stainless steel of the refrigerator, her legs trembling. Dobbin finally looked up from his paper. He watched her for a moment, his dark eyes analyzing her reaction. "I had a new one purchased for you. It's on the counter," he said, gesturing with his chin toward a sleek black box near the espresso machine. Catalina looked at the box, but she didn't move toward it. "You can't just throw my property away. You can't just dictate my life." "I just did," Dobbin replied evenly. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Sit down, Catalina. We need to talk about your employment." "My employment? I already have a job." "Not anymore," he said. "I bought the gallery you work for at 6 a.m. this morning. The current owner was very eager to sell once I explained the tax benefits." Catalina stared at him, her jaw practically unhinged. "You bought the gallery? It's a useful front. And you are a useful asset." Dobbin folded the newspaper and pushed it aside, giving her his full attention. The weight of his gaze was suffocating. "You are an exceptional art appraiser. You have a reputation for immaculate provenance checks, clean records, unimpeachable integrity, which you are trying to buy, which I have bought," he corrected. "I acquire a lot of art, some of it legitimately, some of it less so. I need someone who can process these pieces, verify them, and integrate them into legitimate markets without drawing the attention of the authorities. You are going to do that for me." "That's money laundering," Catalina said, her voice shaking. "That's fraud. I won't do it." Dobbin leaned forward, resting his forearms on the marble island. "Let me explain the reality of your situation to you, because you still seem to think you're in a rom-com where the bad boy has a heart of gold." His voice was a low rumble, devoid of any warmth. "You dragged me into your mess. You put my face, my name, next to yours in front of witnesses. In my world, that means you belong to me. If I let you go back to your pathetic, tracked life, Logan will kill you. Eventually he will catch you in a parking lot or an alley, and he will beat you to death. And it will reflect poorly on me, because people will say Dobbin Mendoza couldn't even protect a woman who publicly begged for his help." He stood up. He was massively tall, imposing in a way that made the large kitchen feel suddenly very small. He walked slowly around the island, stopping 2 feet in front of her. "So, you are going to stay here?" he said, looking down at her. "You are going to appraise my art. You will be paid exceptionally well. You will be safe. Logan will never come within 100 miles of you again." "And if I refuse?" Catalina whispered, tilting her head back to meet his cold eyes. Dobbin reached out. His hand was large, the calluses rough as he lightly brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was entirely devoid of affection. It was an assertion of ownership. "You won't refuse," Dobbin said softly. "Because as much as you hate me right now, you know I'm right. I am the only thing standing between you and a body bag. Now, drink your coffee. Your first shipment of paintings arrives at noon." He walked past her, his heavy footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving Catalina alone in the sprawling, silent cage he had built for her. She looked at the new phone on the counter. She looked at the rain lashing against the impenetrable glass. She had begged him to pretend. He had warned her he didn't. She reached out with a shaking hand and picked up the new phone. The screen lit up. There were no contacts. No history. She was a ghost. And she belonged to him. The basement of Dobbin's compound was not a dungeon. It was a climate-controlled vault, humming with the low, steady vibration of state-of-the-art HVAC systems. The air smelled of ozone, old canvas, and the faint metallic tang of security servers. Catalina stood in the center of the room under a bank of blinding, color-corrected LED lights. A massive easel held a 17th century oil painting, a Dutch seascape, stormy skies, churning grey water, a gallogan tipping dangerously into the trough of a wave. It was beautiful. It was masterful. It was also completely fake. Catalina lowered her magnifying loupe, stepping back and rubbing the bridge of her nose. Her eyes burned. She had been down here for 9 hours. Time had lost its meaning in a room without windows. A heavy magnetic lock clicked. The steel door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Dobbin stepped inside. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, exposing the thick bands of muscle and fading ink on his forearms. He carried a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. He didn't say hello. He just walked up to the painting, his dark eyes sweeping over the violent ocean scene. "The seller wants $4 million, Dobbin said. His voice was a flat baritone in the sterile room. He claims it was looted during the war and kept in a private Swiss cellar for 80 years. Can you authenticate? I can, Catalina said. She picked up a laser pointer from the stainless steel work table beside her. I can authenticate that it was painted about 6 months ago in a warehouse that probably smelled like cheap cigars. Dobbin turned his head slowly. He didn't look angry. He just looked attentive. Explain. Catalina clicked the pointer. A sharp green dot hit the canvas, highlighting a patch of dark storm clouds in the upper right quadrant. The craquelure, the web of fine cracks on the surface of old paintings, is too uniform. Natural aging causes paint to crack unevenly based on how the stretcher bars warp over centuries. This was baked in an industrial oven to force the cracking. She moved the dot to the white crest of a wave. And here, the artist used titanium white. It gives it that brilliant opaque pop. The problem is, titanium white wasn't synthesized for commercial use until 1921. A 17th century Dutch master would have used lead white. If you X-ray this, the underdrawing will look like a modern charcoal sketch, not a classical grid. She set the pointer down. It hit the metal table with a sharp clack. It's a very good forgery, but it's a forgery. If you pay $4 million for this, you're buying expensive firewood. Dobbin looked back at the painting. He took a slow sip of his drink. The ice clinked against the glass. The seller was very confident, Dobbin noted softly. The seller is a liar. I don't like liars. The casual way he said it made the hair on the back of Catalina's neck stand up. It wasn't a complaint. It was a verdict. She watched him pull a sleek black phone from his pocket. He tapped a single button, brought it to his ear, and waited a beat. Cancel the transfer to Volkov, Dobbin ordered. A pause. No. Have a team visit his warehouse in Brooklyn tonight. Burn the inventory. Break his hands. Let him know the seascape was a disappointment. He hung up and slid the phone back into his pocket. Catalina's stomach dropped. The air in the vault suddenly felt too thin to breathe. You're going to break his hands? He tried to steal $4 million from me, Dobbin said, looking at her as if she'd asked why water was wet. In my industry, there is no small claims court. There are consequences. He'll keep his life, but he won't paint any more fake Dutch masters. I didn't tell you so you would hurt him. Her voice shook. She hated that it shook. She hated the sudden, crushing guilt. You told me because it is your job to tell me, Dobbin countered, stepping closer to her. He was too large, too quiet. The scent of him, cedar, scotch, and cold night air, overpowered the smell of old oil paint. You appraise the art. I handle the business. Do not confuse your role with mine, Catalina. My role is a hostage, she spat, taking a step back, her spine hitting the edge of the metal table. Dobbin didn't follow her retreat. He held his ground. Your role is an employee. You are safe. You are fed. You have a blank check to order any equipment you need for this lab. You have security that a head of state would envy. I have a cage. You have a sanctuary, he corrected, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into that gravelly, absolute tone that allowed no argument. You spent 3 years flinching every time a door slammed because of Logan. You walked through life looking over your shoulder. You don't do that here. Instead, I get to watch you order hits on art forgers. Yes, Dobbin finished his drink in one swallow. Welcome to the real world. Violence exists. It always has. The only choice you get is whether you're the one inflicting it, the one suffering it, or the one standing behind the man who controls it. You chose the third option, the second you grabbed my jacket. Own your choice. He set the empty glass on her work table. The real shipment arrives from Munich tomorrow. Get some sleep. He turned and walked out. The heavy steel door slid shut behind him, sealing with a heavy final thud. Catalina stood alone under the blinding lights, staring at the ruined canvas. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She wanted to weep, to scream, to shatter something, but the tears wouldn't come. Dobbin was a monster. But the most terrifying part wasn't the violence he commanded. It was the creeping, horrifying realization that he was absolutely right. She hadn't jumped at a loud noise in 3 days. For the first time in years, she felt perfectly, disgustingly safe. The safety was an illusion. Or rather, it was a fortress, constantly under siege. It happened on a Tuesday, 2 weeks into her captivity. It was 3 a.m. Catalina was asleep in the massive, sterile bedroom, lost in a fragmented dream about drowning in a sea of thick, black oil paint. A sharp, shrill alarm shattered the silence. It wasn't a standard fire alarm. It was a pulsating, low-frequency klaxon that vibrated in her chest. The overhead lights in her room instantly snapped on, glowing a muted emergency red. Catalina bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Before she could process what was happening, the bedroom door flew open. Dobbin stood in the frame. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore dark tactical pants and a black t-shirt. A heavy matte black handgun was gripped loosely in his right hand. His face was a mask of cold, lethal focus. Up, he barked. Shoes, now. Catalina scrambled out of bed, her hands shaking so badly she could barely shove her feet into her sneakers. What is it? What's happening? Perimeter breach, south wall, Dobbin said, stepping into the room and grabbing her bicep. His grip was tight, bruising, hauling her toward the door. Move! He dragged her down the floating staircase. The entire house was bathed in the same eerie red light. Men in tactical gear were moving rapidly through the ground floor, their heavy boots thudding against the marble floors. They carried rifles. Their faces were grim. This wasn't a drill. Dobbin didn't stop. He pulled her past the kitchen, toward a heavy oak door she had never seen open. He punched a code into a keypad on the wall, pressed his thumb to a scanner, and shoved the door open. It was a panic room. Concrete walls, banks of glowing monitors, and a heavy steel blast door. He shoved her inside. Stay in the corner. Do not move. Do not touch anything. Dobbin! Silence. He turned back to the doorway. A man in full tactical gear jogged up to him. Boss, 2 targets. They cut the fiber optics on the south gate, but the redundant sensors caught them on the lawn. Charlie team has them pinned behind the garden retaining wall. Who are they? Dobbin asked, his voice dead calm. Amateurs, the guard replied with a scoff. Carrying cheap heat, no night vision. They're making a lot of noise. Dobbin looked over his shoulder at Catalina. She was huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She was shaking violently. He looked back to the guard. Bring them in alive. Put them in the garage. Yes, sir. The guard sprinted away. Dobbin stepped fully into the panic room and let the heavy steel door slide shut, though he didn't lock it. He walked over to the bank of monitors. They displayed thermal imaging of the sprawling grounds. Two bright white human shapes were huddled behind a wall, surrounded by half a dozen of Dobbin's men. Catalina watched the screen. She watched the little white dots of Dobbin's men close in, swift and merciless. There was no shootout. It was a tactical, overwhelming subjugation. Within 60 seconds, the two intruders were dragged into the open, zip-tied, and hauled toward the house. The red emergency lights clicked off. Normal, soft white lighting flooded the room. The klaxon stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. Dobbin set his handgun on the desk. He didn't look adrenalized. He didn't look frightened. He looked annoyed, like a man who had just found ants in his kitchen. "Who were they?" Catalina whispered, her throat dry. Dobbin tapped a few keys on the console. The camera feed switched to the cavernous underground garage. Two men were kneeling on the concrete, their hands bound behind their backs. They were bleeding. They looked terrified. "Let's find out," Dobbin said. He walked out of the panic room. This time, he didn't tell her to stay. He left the door open. A morbid, sickening curiosity pulled Catalina to her feet. She followed him out, maintaining a 10-foot distance as they walked down the long corridor toward the garage access. The garage was massive, housing a half-dozen luxury vehicles. The smell of oil, exhaust, and copper hung heavily in the air. 4 of Dobbin's guards stood in a semicircle around the kneeling men. Catalina hung back in the shadows of the doorway, watching. Dobbin walked slowly toward the intruders. He didn't yell. He didn't brandish a weapon. His sheer physical presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the large space. "Who sent you?" Dobbin asked. The question echoed off the concrete walls. One of the men, a wiry kid with a split lip and a cheap leather jacket, spat blood onto the floor. "Screw you. We know what you got in here. We wanted a payday." Dobbin stared at the kid. He didn't blink. Then he looked at the guard standing nearest to the kid. Dobbin gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The guard stepped forward and kicked the kid in the ribs. The sound of bone cracking was entirely different from how it sounded in movies. It was dull, sickening, a wet snap. The kid collapsed, screaming, writhing on the concrete floor. Catalina clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle a gasp. Her stomach rolled violently. Dobbin didn't look at the screaming man. He looked at the second intruder. A heavier, older man who was sweating profusely, his eyes wide with stark terror. "I'll ask again," Dobbin said, his voice entirely devoid of inflection. "Who sent you?" "Logan!" The older man screamed, the name tearing out of his throat in a desperate rush to avoid the same fate as his partner. "Logan! He paid us. He said you stole his girl. He said you had millions in art down here and that you were soft because you were playing house." The name hit Catalina like a physical blow. Logan. He hadn't let it go. He hadn't run away terrified after the gala. His pride was too fragile, his rage too volatile. He had found street-level thugs and paid them to breach a Mafia stronghold. He was stupid. He was reckless. And he was going to get people killed just to get to her. Dobbin stood perfectly still. The silence in the garage stretched out, broken only by the wet, ragged groans of the kid on the floor. "Logan," Dobbin repeated softly. He turned his head, his dark eyes cutting through the shadows, finding Catalina standing in the doorway. He looked at her pale face, her trembling frame, her wide, horrified eyes. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't apologize for the violence she had just witnessed. He just let her look at the blood on the floor. He turned back to the guards. "Take them to the warehouse by the docks," Dobbin ordered. "Extract everything they know about Logan's current location, his finances, and anyone else he's spoken to." "And then?" one of the guards asked. Dobbin looked down at the two men. "Then process them. They don't leave the warehouse." Catalina stumbled backward. She hit the wall of the corridor, sliding down until she hit the floor. Her breath came in short, jagged gasps. Process them. It was a sterile, corporate word for murder. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Dobbin stopped in front of her. He crouched down, his large frame blocking out the light from the garage. "You think I'm a monster," Dobbin said. It wasn't a question. "You are," she gasped, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "You're going to kill them." "Yes," he agreed simply. "I am. Because if I just beat them and send them away, Logan learns where the weaknesses in my perimeter are. He tries again with better men, and eventually, a bullet comes through your bedroom window." He reached out. This time, he didn't touch her hair. He gripped her chin, his fingers rough and warm, forcing her to look directly into his dark, empty eyes. "You asked me to protect you," Dobbin said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "This is what protection looks like. It is not pretty. It is not clean. It is blood on concrete. Do not cry for the men who came here to drag you back to your abuser." He released her chin and stood up. "Go back to bed, Catalina. You have 2 Dutch still lifes to appraise in the morning." He walked away, leaving her sitting on the cold floor, caught between the ghost of the man who wanted to break her and the reality of the man who was keeping her alive. The most terrifying thing about the cage was how quickly she learned to pace it. A week after the breach, the shock had metabolized into a dull, heavy numbness. Catalina stopped jumping when the heavy steel door of the vault engaged. She stopped tracking the hours. She slept. She ate the meticulous meals brought by silent staff. And she sat under the blinding LED lights, dissecting the brushstrokes of dead men. She was adapting. It sickened her. She was currently staring at a pair of floral still lifes, trying to determine if the lapis lazuli pigment in the blue irises was historically accurate for 1640s Amsterdam. Her magnifying loupe was pressed against her eye. The world was reduced to cracks in varnish and the chemical composition of paint. The door hissed open. Catalina didn't flinch. She didn't drop the loupe. She just finished logging a note on her tablet before turning around. Dobbin stood in the doorway. The pristine image he usually projected was fractured. His dark suit jacket was missing. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the fabric clinging to his chest. There was a smear of dark, drying blood across his left cheekbone, and his knuckles were wrapped in a single, haphazard layer of white gauze that was rapidly turning pink. He looked exhausted. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who maintained his empire with his bare hands. He walked to the stainless steel prep table and leaned against it. He didn't say anything. He just watched her. "You're bleeding," Catalina pointed out. Her voice was flat, devoid of the panic she would have felt a week ago. Dobbin reached up, dragging the back of his wrist across his cheekbone. He looked at the rust-coloured stain on his skin with mild disinterest. "A disagreement at the docks. It's handled." "More processing?" The cynical bite in her tone made his eyes snap up. He studied her face, searching for the trembling girl who had begged for his help at the gala. She was gone, buried under layers of stress and sheer survival instinct. "Sometimes," Dobbin said slowly, "people don't listen to words. They only understand leverage, or pain." I applied the latter. Catalina set her tablet down. She walked over to the small industrial sink in the corner of the vault. She wet a clean microfiber cloth with cold water, wrung it out, and walked back to him. She didn't ask for permission. She reached up and pressed the damp cloth against the cut on his cheek. Dobbin stiffened. Every muscle in his broad chest locked into stone. But he didn't pull away. He looked down at her, his breathing shallow, his dark eyes tracking every micro-expression on her face. She wasn't doing this out of affection. She was doing it because the blood was a glaring, uncomfortable reminder of the violence that paid for the roof over her head. She wanted it gone. "You're not afraid of me today," Dobbin murmured, the gravel in his voice scraping against the quiet hum of the vault. "I'm terrified of you," Catalina corrected quietly, scrubbing at the dried blood. "But being afraid takes a lot of energy. I ran out yesterday. You're adapting. I'm surviving." She tossed the bloodied cloth onto the metal table. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Dobbin shifted his weight, closing the small gap between them. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. smell the metallic tang of copper, and the sharp bite of gunpowder lingering on his clothes. Survival is just adaptation taken to its extreme. You eat my food. You sleep in my bed. You authenticate my stolen art. You're part of this now, Catalina. You can scrub the blood off my face, but it doesn't change the fact that you belong here. I belong to myself, she whispered, though the words tasted hollow. Dobbin's jaw tightened. He reached out, his gauze-wrapped hand catching her wrist. He didn't squeeze. He just held her tethered to him. "Where is Logan?" she asked, desperate to change the subject, to push away the suffocating intimacy of his proximity. "Hiding," Dobbin said, his thumb brushing over the frantic pulse at her wrist. "He went underground after his men failed to return from the garage. He's running out of money, and he's running out of friends. Fear makes men stupid. He will make a mistake soon. And when he does, my people will be there. And then it's over." Dobbin finally let go of her wrist. He stepped back, the cold, impenetrable mask slipping back into place over his features. "And then he's gone," Dobbin corrected. "But this—" He gestured between the two of them, to the vault, to the invisible bars of her cage. "This is never over. I told you, I don't pretend. I claimed you. I don't give up what is mine." He turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. "Dobbin," she called out. He paused, glancing over his shoulder. "The floral still lifes are genuine," she said, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. "You can pay the seller." Dobbin gave a single, curt nod. The door hissed shut behind him. Catalina looked down at her hands. They were trembling, just a little. She looked at the blood-stained cloth on the table. She had touched him. She had cleaned his wounds. She was no longer just a hostage in the cage. She was starting to clean the bars. The mistake Dobbin predicted happened 3 days later. It was raining again. The compound felt like a submarine, pressurized and isolated from the rest of the world. Catalina was in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, when the heavy oak door to Dobbin's private office slammed open. The sound was sharp, violent. Dobbin strode down the hallway. He was moving with a terrifying, coiled momentum. He wore a black trench coat over a dark suit, pulling on a pair of black leather gloves. His face was carved from granite. 3 of his men were trailing him, practically jogging to keep up with his long strides. "Get the SUV ready. Tell Marcus to prep the cleanup crew. If the police get there first, buy them off. If they won't take the money, break their radios and secure the perimeter anyway," Dobbin barked over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw Catalina standing in the kitchen doorway. The men behind him stopped instantly, giving him a wide berth. The air in the corridor crackled with lethal intent. "What happened?" Catalina asked. The cold tea sloshed over the rim of her mug, burning her knuckles, but she didn't feel it. Dobbin looked at her. For a fraction of a second, something dark and violently protective flared in his eyes. He stepped away from his men, closing the distance to her. "Go to the vault," he ordered, his voice dangerously low. "Lock the door from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me." Dobbin. What did he do? He sent a message. Dobbin's jaw flexed. "Logan couldn't get through my gates. He couldn't find my men. So he went for the only thing he knew you cared about that was left exposed." Catalina's heart stopped. Her mind raced through the narrow list of her attachments. She had no family left. Her friends from college had drifted away when Logan first started isolating her. There was only one thing. "The gallery," she breathed. "He burned it down," Dobbin said bluntly. There was no sugarcoating in his world. 30 minutes ago, he used accelerant. The structural integrity is compromised. It's a total loss. Catalina swayed on her feet. The gallery. It wasn't just a job. It had been her sanctuary before Dobbin's compound. It was the place she had hidden when Logan was angry. It was thousands of hours of work, millions of dollars of art, history, beauty, all reduced to ash because of her. Was anyone... She couldn't finish the sentence. The gallery owner, the young receptionist who always brought her lattes. The building was empty. It was before opening hours, Dobbin said. reading the absolute terror in her eyes. Everyone is alive, but he left a package on the front step before he lit the match. It was addressed to me. What was in it? Dobbin reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small, charred piece of fabric. He held it up. It was the shredded, burnt remains of a grey wool lapel. Catalina stared at it. It was a piece of the suit jacket Dobbin had been wearing the night of the gala, the night she had grabbed him. Logan had somehow found out which tailor made Dobbin's suits, or he had broken into the dry cleaners. It didn't matter how he got it. The message was perfectly, horrifically clear. I know what she touched. I know who you are, and I can still burn your things. He's a dead man, Dobbin said softly. The sheer lack of volume made the threat infinitely more terrifying. He crushed the burnt wool in his leather-gloved fist. He just made this personal. He touched my property. Catalina looked up at him. She saw the absolute, unflinching certainty of murder in his eyes. He was leaving this house to kill a man, and she wanted him to do it. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The moral high ground she had been clinging to dissolved into ash, just like her gallery. She didn't care about the law. She didn't care about justice. She wanted Logan erased from the earth so she could finally, truly breathe. You're going after him yourself, she said. Yes. Because of the gallery? Or because of the jacket? Dobbin reached out. He gripped the back of her neck, his leather glove cold and smooth against her skin. He pulled her forward, just an inch, asserting his dominance, his ownership. Because of you, Dobbin corrected, his voice a harsh rasp. He thinks he can terrorize what is mine and walk away. I'm going to show him exactly what happens when you mistake a warning for a challenge. He let go of her neck. Go to the vault, Catalina. Lock the door. He didn't wait to see if she obeyed. He turned on his heel and walked out the front door, his men swarming behind him. Catalina stood in the empty hallway. The silence of the compound pressed in on her, heavy and absolute. She looked at the cold cup of tea in her hand. Then, she walked down the hall, descended the stairs, and stepped into the underground vault. She pressed the heavy button on the wall. The magnetic lock engaged with a loud, final clack. She was locked in. And for the first time in her life, she hoped the monster hunting in the dark outside came back victorious. The vault was a tomb. For 12 hours, Catalina sat on the cold steel stool, listening to the agonizing rhythmic hum of the ventilation system. She had stared at the Dutch still lifes until the blooming irises and wilting tulips blurred into abstract smears of blue and yellow. The flowers were dead things, preserved perfectly in oil and varnish. They were beautiful because they couldn't rot. They were safe because they were trapped. She understood them intimately. Time distorted in the windowless room. She paced the length of the concrete floor until her feet ached, measuring the exact dimensions of her cage. 30 feet by 40 feet, $1 million of stolen art, one metal sink, one heavy steel door. Every time the air conditioning kicked on, she braced herself, expecting the pneumatic hiss of the lock. Every time it faded into silence, the crushing weight of isolation settled back onto her shoulders. She wasn't waiting for a rescue. She was waiting for an executioner to return. She thought about Logan. She tried to summon the ghost of the man she had met 4 years ago. The charming, overly attentive financial analyst who brought her coffee and listened to her talk about art history. But that man was an illusion, a costume worn by a coward. The real Logan was the man who had shattered her collarbone because she had smiled too long at a waiter. The real Logan was the man who burned down a building full of innocent people just to send a message to a bigger predator. She didn't want Logan to survive. The realization sat heavy and cold in the pit of her stomach. She didn't want justice. She didn't want the police to arrest him and drag him through a multi-year trial where he would stare at her from across the courtroom. She wanted him erased. She wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. She had handed him to Dobbin Mendoza, knowing exactly what Dobbin did to things that threatened him. The heavy magnetic lock on the vault door clicked with a sudden, violent finality. Catalina stopped breathing. She stood perfectly still in the center of the room, her hands gripping the edges of the stainless steel work table. The door slid open. Dobbin stepped inside. He moved slowly, devoid of the coiled, lethal momentum he had carried when he left. His black trench coat was gone. His suit jacket was ruined, torn at the shoulder and heavily stained with something thick and dark that had soaked through the fine Italian wool. He looked exhausted. The sharp, immaculate edge of the Mafia boss had been filed down, revealing the sheer, brutal exhaustion of a man who worked in the currency of violence. He didn't look at her immediately. He walked straight to the industrial sink in the corner of the room. He turned the cold tap on full blast. He stripped off his ruined jacket, letting it drop to the pristine floor with a heavy, wet thud. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves. His forearms were smeared with ash, grease, and blood. He plunged his hands into the rushing water, grabbing a rough bar of pumice soap. Catalina watched the water turning pink as it swirled down the stainless steel drain. The sound of the running faucet was deafening in the quiet room. "Is it over?" she asked. Her voice sounded thin, frail against the harsh reality of the blood on his skin. Dobbin didn't stop scrubbing. He worked the soap over his scarred knuckles, his jaw tight. "It's over." Where was he? An abandoned rail yard on the south side, Dobbin said, his voice a low, gravelly scrape. He paid a drifter to use his phone. He thought he was being smart. He thought moving constantly would keep him off the grid. He didn't realize I own the grid. Dobbin turned off the water. He pulled a paper towel from the dispenser and dried his hands with slow, deliberate motions. He turned around, leaning his back against the sink, finally meeting her eyes. His face was a mask of cold stone, but his dark eyes were empty. It was the terrifying, hollow look of a man who had just taken a life and felt absolutely nothing about it. "Did he fight?" Catalina asked, stepping away from the table, drawn toward him by a morbid, sickening need to know the absolute truth. Dobbin let out a short, humorless breath. He tossed the damp paper towel into a bin. "No. Men like him don't fight when the odds turn. They panic. He ran until he hit a chain-link fence. Then he fell to his knees." Catalina's chest tightened. She could picture it. The smell of wet rust and rain, Logan's face pale and slick with sweat, the pathetic crumbling facade of his ego. "What did he say?" she whispered. Dobbin pushed off the sink. He walked slowly toward her, his large frame casting a heavy shadow under the blinding LED lights. He stopped a foot away. The scent of him, smoke, rain, and the sharp, metallic tang of copper enveloped her. "He begged," Dobbin said bluntly, refusing to soften the reality for her. "He cried. He offered me the money he had left in an offshore account. When I didn't take that, he offered me you." A physical shockwave of nausea rolled through Catalina. "He offered me to you. He said I could keep you. He said you were a lot of work, but that you were obedient once you learned your place. He said if I let him walk away, he would never look for you again. He tried to trade your life for his." Dobbin reached into his pocket. He pulled out a heavy gold signet ring. It was scarred and scratched. Catalina knew it intimately. She had felt it cut into her cheek 3 years ago. Dobbin dropped the ring onto the stainless steel table. It landed with a sharp, heavy clap that echoed off the concrete walls. "I told him," Dobbin continued, his voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet rumble, "that you already belong to me, and that I don't negotiate for things I already own." Catalina stared at the ring. The last lingering shred of guilt, the tiny, civilized voice in her head that said murder was a sin, evaporated. Logan was a monster who would have sold her to a butcher if it meant saving his own skin. He had died exactly as he had lived, a coward. She looked up from the ring, meeting Dobbin's dark, unwavering gaze. "Are you okay?" she asked. It was a stupid, absurd question to ask a mob boss who had just committed a homicide, but the words slipped out of her mouth before she could stop them. Dobbin's eyes flickered. The question genuinely surprised him. He looked down at her, studying the lack of fear in her expression. He searched for the trembling girl who had cowered behind him at the gala. She was gone, I am exactly what I have always been, Dobbin said softly. He reached out, his clean, damp hand cupping the side of her face. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, a startlingly gentle contrast to the violence he had just inflicted. The question is, Catalina, are you? She didn't pull away from his touch. She leaned into it, closing her eyes as the warmth of his palm seeped into her cold skin. She was an accomplice. She was a beneficiary of blood money. She was ruined, and she had never felt safer. The morning broke grey and washed out, the storm finally breaking over the city. Catalina stood in the center of the massive, minimalist bedroom. She was holding a small leather duffel bag. Inside were 3 pairs of jeans, a few sweaters Dobbin had ordered for her, and a heavy envelope stuffed with $20,000 in untraceable cash. An hour ago, Dobbin had walked into the kitchen, slid the envelope across the marble island, and laid her new cell phone on top of it. The perimeter is clear, he had said, drinking his espresso without looking at her. Logan is ashes in an incinerator. His associates have been severely discouraged from asking questions. The gate is open. Your employment here is terminated. He had fired her. He had freed her. Catalina zipped the duffel bag closed. The sound was loud in the quiet room. She looked around at the concrete walls, the sprawling bed, the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the manicured, fortified grounds. This had been her cage for 3 weeks. She slung the bag over her shoulder and walked out into the hallway. The house was completely silent. The guards who usually patrolled the corridors were conspicuously absent. Dobbin had cleared the way. He was giving her a clean, unimpeded exit. She walked down the floating staircase, her footsteps echoing. She reached the grand foyer. The massive front door was slightly ajar, letting in the cool, damp morning air. Beyond it, the heavy wrought-iron gates at the end of the driveway stood wide open, framing a view of the winding, tree-lined road that led back to the city, back to civilization, back to coffee shops and crowded streets, and regular people who didn't solve their problems with firearms. Catalina stood at the threshold. She looked at the open gate. She felt nothing but a hollow, creeping terror. The world out there wasn't civilized. It was full of men like Logan. It was full of people who smiled at you while calculating how much damage they could inflict before anyone noticed. Out there, she was just a woman with an envelope of cash and no protection. Out there, the next time someone cornered her in a room, there wouldn't be a man in a charcoal suit to step in front of her. She dropped the duffel bag. It hit the marble floor with a heavy thud. She turned around. Dobbin was standing in the doorway of his office at the end of the hall. He wore a crisp white shirt and dark trousers. His hands were in his pockets. He was watching her. He had been watching her the entire time. He didn't look surprised that she had stopped. He looked like a man waiting for an inevitable conclusion. Catalina walked back toward him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but it wasn't fear. It was a terrifying, absolute clarity. She closed the distance, stopping 3 feet in front of him. "I'm not leaving," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Dobbin didn't move. His dark eyes locked onto hers, dissecting her resolve. "The threat is neutralized, Catalina. You got what you wanted. You can go back to your life." "I don't have a life. Logan burned my gallery. You threw my phone in the river. I don't exist anymore." "You have $20,000. You can start over." "I don't want to start over," she snapped, taking a step closer, invading his space. "I want to stay here. I want to work in the vault. I want to authenticate your stolen art." Dobbin's jaw tightened. He pulled his hands out of his pockets, his posture shifting, becoming the imposing, dangerous predator she had met at the gala. "Do you understand what you are asking for? If you stay now, it is not as a hostage. It is not as a refugee hiding from an ex-boyfriend. If you stay, you are choosing this life. You are choosing me. There is no moral high ground left for you to stand on." "I know. I am a violent man," Dobbin said, his voice a low, gravelly warning. "I break things for a living. I kill people who cross me. I will not change. I will not soften for you. If you walk past me into this house, you belong to the dark." Catalina looked up at him. She saw the scar cutting through his eyebrow. She saw the bruised knuckles. She saw the man who had walked into an abandoned train yard and executed her nightmare without a second thought. "I don't need you to be soft," Catalina whispered. "I need you to be exactly what you are." She reached out. She grabbed the lapel of his white shirt, exactly the way she had grabbed his suit jacket on the night they met. But this time, she wasn't asking for a shield. She was anchoring herself to the storm. "Pretend I'm yours," Dobbin murmured, repeating her desperate plea from weeks ago, his voice laced with dark irony. "I don't want you to pretend," she answered. Dobbin's restraint shattered. His large hands came up, gripping the sides of her face with a bruising, desperate intensity. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, cinematic kiss. It was a collision. It was teeth and heat and total, absolute possession. It was a claim staked in blood and ash. Catalina gasped against his mouth, her hands sliding up his chest to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. She tasted the bitter bite of espresso and the lingering metallic edge of adrenaline. He backed her up against the heavy oak frame of the office door, his heavy body pressing her flush against the wood. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, both of them breathing raggedly. His dark eyes burned with a fierce, terrifying possessiveness. "You're mine," Dobbin rasped, his thumb digging into her jawline. "No more running, no more hiding. You are mine." "Yes," Catalina breathed, the word a permanent surrender. She closed her eyes, letting the heavy, violent weight of him hold her up. She had walked into the monster's cave to survive. Now she was locking the door behind her, ready to rule the dark. Did Catalina make the right choice, or did she trade one monster for a worse one? If this dark, intense Mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Your support helps bring more thrilling, high-stakes stories to life. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow romance and suspense lovers. Who do you think they would cast as Dobbin? Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss the next deep, grounded, and emotional audiobook experience. Drop a comment below. Would you have stayed in the vault?